Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest, Dr. Susanne Babbel, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Heal the Body, Heal the Mind, a somatic approach to moving beyond trauma. Susanne is a licensed psychotherapist practicing trauma specialty in her private practice in San Francisco. She's a member of the California Association for Marriage and Family Therapists, as well as the United States Association for Body Psychotherapy and European Association for Body Psychotherapy. A contributing author for nearly a decade to Psychology Today online blog, Susanne also writes for newspapers, magazines, and appears on radio shows. And she also co-taught the UC Davis Extension online course on trauma bonding. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Susanne Babbel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you here and, of course, to talk about your new book. You have to be so excited because I know a lot of people are talking about how your book is really changing their lives.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for when I wrote the book, to have an impact on people, and especially people who don't know that they have trauma, because that's what's happening in my practice a lot. And when I talk to people, and we recently had, for example, we had the fires here last year, and people didn't know that you can get traumatized by losing a house, by going through that. And so that happened all the time in my office and privately. And so I thought, oh, people have to be educated and they need help. And so that's why I wrote the book.
Well, Dina, I think it's so great for people to have a basic understanding, and I love that your book covers that. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to share, because I know every book has a journey, and as you were creating this book, was there a specific inspiration or someone that you wrote, with this book in mind for?
Yes, there. In my book, I talk about a trauma survivor, Michael. And, well, it wasn't just for him, but it was, like I said, for all my clients that came to me and didn't know their trauma. But I also really connected to Michael, who's had so many traumas, and how he conquered it in his life. And he is an older man, and so he had a lot of stories from the time of depression, and so there was also history involved. And I just thought he had so much wisdom as well, and I was so impressed by how he conquered trauma and how he moved through that journey, that I really wanted him to be part of the book. And he always wanted to be, he wanted to have a legacy, and I thought, oh, so this might be nice for him, and he was really excited about. He always said that he wanted to be part of the book and create a legacy. So that worked out really nicely. So I did always have him in mind when I wrote the book.
Well, I think that's, so important. And I think our listeners, as they hear that, they understand that there's so much meaning behind this book, aside from the fact that it's helping people to understand what trauma is, but there's this really human link to it as well.
Yeah, it is. And originally it changed, once I had it with New Harbinger, it changed slightly, and I'm really glad that it did. But in the beginning, it was more stories of people, there were three main characters, and that was their stories. And they still come through in the book, but that's kind of how it was in the beginning, a lot more stories, and then weaving in the theory and the self-help. But it had to be organized a little bit different to make it easier for the reader. And I'm glad we did that, but it also, the stories are not as elaborated anymore, but it felt really good. And the writing process, it felt good to know these stories.
Well, and so why don't we go over some basic terminology? Because I think about trauma, different people may understand it differently or think it means different things. So when we talk about a somatic approach, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. Somatic really only means that it's body-oriented. And why that is so important with trauma is that when we have a traumatic experience, and so that it can also be any stressful experience, by the way, we go into fight, flight, freeze, and that is a physiological reaction. That is a reaction of the body. And so it's really important that we address the body when we want to reverse trauma reactions, because the fight, flight, freeze is comes from the nervous system that reacts, and then we go into fight, flight, freeze. And so the somatic just means that we incorporate the physiology, the body that reacts to trauma. And so I found that really to be very important. And it's really important to have verbal therapy. That is one piece of the puzzle, but the somatic psychology or the somatic approach, which really is only the including the body, is the other half of, or even more, I would say, of the puzzle. And if it doesn't get addressed, the trauma will never really resolve, because that's where it originates. It's because we react to a stressful and overwhelming situation with our body.
Well, and, again, it's good to hear that and hear what these different approaches are. When we talk about, trauma, I know in your book you list quite a bit different, you've got lists of traumas. What are some of the common ones that we can kind of just touch on real quick?
Yeah, like we had the recent, everyone thinks only people who've been served in the war, the Vietnam vets or vets, or people who've had childhood abuse have trauma. And that's what I hear a lot in my practice. But there's a lot going on. For example, bullying, that's very common, that produces trauma and trauma reactions. The recent fires. And people are not aware that those can also cause trauma. And so those we could touch on if you want, for example.
Yes, let's go over that, because I mean, a lot of times people just don't even consider that. They think of it, if someone had a flood and lose their home, or fire and loses their home, they don't really think of that as a trauma. It's like, you just will rebuild,
Yes, no, but it is, that's also traumatic. Yeah, and like you said, there are many, and it's good for people to look at the book and not just think, oh no, I didn't have trauma, and then skip that section. So, but yeah, losing home for sure. And also, it's not just losing the home. They might have been evacuated. They didn't. And it's also losing home. You lose everything that is in the house, all the memories, everything. Like I've had some clients and their parents lost their homes, and all their pictures from childhood were burned. And it's the loss. Loss is also usually loss of a person, but just going through that of losing everything, but also how they lost it. They had to go somewhere. They had to leave everything behind, the flames, the smoke. It was, I don't know if you, where are you located, by the way? I don't know if you, in what state?
Well, I've actually been in California, Colorado, and I'm in North Carolina. Yeah. And in all these separate states, I mean, I was in California during Northridge, and we had the horrible earthquakes, and, things were happening.
Yes.
Friends that were affected by the fire. In Colorado, there was that fire years ago, and it burnt down the cabin that I was staying in. And you look at here in North Carolina, they've had hurricanes and flooding and, lots of, I don't think you can look at it as part of our country and not see where someone has been affected.
Yes. And so you're so right. And it's the situations that are overwhelming that we don't know how to cope with, because it's just too much all at once. And when you lose a home, it can be so overwhelming. It depends on what's going on in their lives right now too. For example, it depends on how old is the person that lost their home, right? So it's because then if the older they are, maybe they couldn't run away from the fire as easily and they were stuck in the house and they were just rescued last minute, for example, or they were really afraid. Everything worked out, but they were really afraid that they wouldn't get help, or so it's usually trauma is also what we find to be too overwhelming to cope with. And that's when we go into fight, flight, freeze. So we only think it's physical, but it's not just physical. It's just too much, you know?
Yeah, it really can be. I mean, going through something where you're having to, preserve your life in one way or another, and then you come back and everything's gone. It's pretty traumatic. And I'm so glad this book outlines, some of the different traumas so people can really kind of keep that in mind as they're communicating with other people, because, I think we need to change some of the language in regards to how we communicate with people when they've gone through tragedies.
Yes, that's so true. And we also think, they can just build another house. They didn't have trauma, and then we don't have compassion for them, and then we might not be as helpful. But what they also show in research is that if the community gives moral support, that those people actually have less PTSD symptoms, so the trauma symptoms, post-traumatic stress symptoms, than those people who don't get moral support from the community. And Bessel, I have that in the Bessel Vanderkolk. He's very well known in the trauma, as a trauma researcher. And so he said that once in a lecture. But that's what it's a moral support, and then of course whatever physical support we can give. But the support of the community is actually what helps to lessen the PTSD symptoms. And so if we don't have compassion for them, if we don't know what trauma is, are we going to be as supportive as if we were educated? So I think it's really important that even if we didn't have trauma, if we know somebody has trauma and we know how to support them, then actually people have less trauma symptoms.
Yeah, they're able to have that emotional and support and understanding from the people around them, because we all know someone that's gone through something,
Yes.
Maybe it's, they've been abused as a child, or they've had some type of abuse or trauma that's happened to them along the way. Maybe a veteran who's, suffered from PTSD. It could be a wide range of things.
Yes, and when we give them, with the fires and earthquakes and so on, if we give them support, they don't feel forgotten. They don't feel as overwhelmed. They know they can lean on someone. They just know there are people who care. So it's just really important. And I think that we are not, as a community, we are not aware of that, how much we can actually help with little things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so in your book, you talk about, understanding the past and then being able to move forward in a really healthy way. And for a lot of people that might be in, kind of still in the trauma, that could seem like a reach for them. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners how that's possible.
Yeah, so the main part is to release trauma, is really to work with the nervous system, and that the nervous system is the part of the body that responds to trauma and the fight, flight, freeze, and I mentioned that earlier. When we address that, and so what we have to do to address that is we have to learn to talk to the nervous system. And the nervous system is in a different part, has a different part of the brain than our logical brain. And so, in fact, when we are overwhelmed, when we're stressed, and when we've had a traumatic event happening, is that our logical brain actually goes on the back burner. It kind of gets shut down, and the nervous system takes over. And so that's why it seems like that so many people are irrational when they are stressed or when they've been in a traumatic situation, because the nervous system takes over. But so the nervous system doesn't speak the language that like the logical brain. So we have to speak to it in a different language. I always say I just pick Chinese for now, but you could pick any language. But if you speak Chinese to someone who is an American and doesn't speak Chinese, then he won't understand what you're saying. So if you address the nervous system with a language that it doesn't understand, it won't respond. And so, for example, in verbal therapy, and it is very important, verbal therapy is very important, but if you only do that, you don't speak to the nervous system. That because it doesn't understand that language. So the only language the nervous system speaks is through sensations. And then I ask people a lot of times, so what do you sense in your body? And they will tell me, I feel sad. And then I have to educate them, and it's totally fine because you don't grow up that way, is that sad is actually an emotion, not a sensation, but they don't know how to feel a sensation. So that is the first step, is to learn vocabulary. So I give them a sheet of vocabulary of sensations, or I ask them to look up sensations or learn the vocabulary. Oh, so I feel my heartbeat is going fast. I feel warmth in my fingers. I feel cold. Or those are simple sensations, but there are so many. So first we have to learn another language, basically, and to learn to describe an emotion with sensations that are happening at the same time as we feel an emotion. Because what happens is then, once we are in touch with the sensation, we describe it. And mind you, this is a 3-year training that I went through, for example, and then I assisted a few years after that, because it is quite complicated. So it's easiest when you go to a therapist and work with that. But you can also do a lot at home, and that's why I wrote the book that's more than 20 exercises. There's so much you can to speed up the process or do yourself. But if you get stuck, then of course it's always good to go to a therapist. But learn the vocabulary of sensation, and then to have body awareness, and I call it in my book body conversations. To have a conversation with your body, get it on the same page as your logical mind, and then those together do very beautifully. And then that doesn't happen in just one setting, and so people have to keep doing it and doing it. But every time there's a little step forward, and then eventually the nervous system will go into a relaxed mode rather than being in a survival mode, which is the fight, flight, freeze. So once they go in the relaxed mode, which we call the parasympathetic mode, I just throw these words out. I say it in a simple way, and then I also give the vocabulary for those people who want to research more once they reach their goals of learning the vocabulary and so on. Then they can go and say, oh, what is this? Okay, I can look up more, and now I can go to the next level. But once you are in touch, once you're connected to and have a way of communicating with the sensations that are present at the same time as the emotion or the feelings that come up with the trauma, and connect them to, they are then going to the relaxed mode and say, you know what, now I'm safe. And when we are in fight, flight, freeze, we are in survival mode and feel unsafe all the time. Typical, for example, is the catastrophic thinking. If I do this and if I do that, then this will happen, so therefore I won't do it, and then you avoid. So some people who lost a loved one, they might say, I don't go anywhere anymore because that person died or that in a car accident, and so therefore I won't drive anymore, or whatever comes up, but we want to then avoid. But there's always this catastrophic thinking, and if I do this, no, then that something horrible will happen, so I won't do it. So the best way is to learn the vocabulary of sensations and have a conversation with the nervous system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I love how you put that, because it kind of walks people through how to move from one point to another, and it's something that's obtainable. I think a lot of times,
yes.
Well, maybe I can't reach there, or maybe I'm not healthy enough, or this is going to be really hard, and you just walk through how to do that.
Yeah, and it is, I have to say, that the beginning is hard a lot of times. It's good to start slowly, learn the vocabulary, start with an easy sensation, and then work yourself up, because what happens is that, especially if we've been in survival mode for a long time, is that we learned that even though we are always in survival mode, that feels safe. So then if you slowly learn to alter that perception, we inherently want to fight it because we feel safe a certain way. So anything that's new doesn't feel safe. So there's kind of the body and the mind want to fight it. So it's getting over the initial hump, knowing, okay, I know my body is going to fight me. I know my mind is going to be fighting me because this has felt makes me feel safe, and has made me feel safer in the last so many years or months or days. And so it's hard to give it up, but just do it slowly, just step by step, and then knowing, okay, if I work on that, I will actually feel safe and feel good. It's okay. It's safe to feel good, because a lot of trauma survivors don't feel safe to feel good, because something can happen. And that's what they struggle with. No, I can't feel good. I can't feel happy. Something will happen. It's better to feel sad and be in survival mode than be happy and be open. And, a lot of times happiness and feeling good is connected with feeling vulnerable and open.
Well, and, I think that it's important for people to hear that, because a lot of times, and I kind of got this from reading, your book, that people can be a little closed when it comes to, kind of investigating where this is coming from. And so it takes kind of a little bit of a broader view to go, okay, wait a minute, where is this coming from? And having that dialogue.
Yes, exactly. That is so important.
Well, in your book, you talk about how trauma impacts our health. You kind of briefly touched on some of that. What are some ways you'd like to share with our listeners that some of the signs that we can see of trauma impacting our health?
Yeah, so what I see is, again, when we are in survival mode and we go into fight, flight, freeze, what happens if you think of, you have to fight off an object, your hands have to go up, and what do you need to do so that your hands go up into protection mode or fight? For that, your body has to produce hormones, stress hormones, for example, like adrenaline and cortisol. And so when you get stuck in this mode, which we do after trauma a lot of times, not everyone, but if you do get stuck, then your body constantly wants to be producing adrenaline and to stay in the survival mode, to stay protected, because something could happen again. So the body will always create adrenaline, for example, and cortisol. And the adrenaline comes from the adrenal gland. And so wouldn't it make sense that eventually the adrenal gland has nothing left, and then you have adrenal fatigue? And adrenal fatigue is just you wake up in the morning and you're tired, and all kinds of symptoms. So chronic fatigues, for example, and also thyroid abnormalities, also stomach issues are also very common. And you know why? Because when you, for example, you fight off an object, you are going into fight or flight or freeze mode, usually fight flight, then all the blood goes into your limbs, so you can run or you can fight, and it comes out of the stomach, because in that moment you don't need the blood to eat. You don't think of eating or processing food. So it's beautiful. It's set up by the body. It's just when you get stuck in it, it wears down those parts of the body. So if there's never any blood or in the stomach, then you get stomach issues. So it's very common for people to have bowel issues, stomach issues, ulcers. It also skin issues, and most common is also insomnia, not being able to sleep. And so all those come from because our body is constantly creating stress hormones, and that attacks the body. And so, so that's why we struggle with health issues, and it wears down our immune system.
Well, and you also talk about the importance of relaxing and how people can get to a place of being in a relaxed state in your book, which I found to be very helpful.
Yes, that is very important, because then your body, because it always goes into survival mode, and if you do a relaxation exercise, and there's so many apps nowadays that you can go on, and they even have PTSD apps with sounds that are for people that calming them down, but also meditations. And I have to say that sometimes it's hard for trauma survivors to do meditations that are sitting meditations, because their body wants to move, right? Because they're in survival mode. And so I've had one client who said his girlfriend really wants him to meditate and sit meditating, while meditating. But the problem is that when we are in survival mode, the body says fight or flight, and so that doesn't go with sitting. So it's really hard for a lot of them. So that's one of the exercises at the end of the book. Do a meditation practice that is walking and breathe, count, say something, like people who also pray, that can be a meditation as well. And so at the end of the book, there's an exercise where you don't have to sit. You can move, but focus on, for 10 or 20 minutes, focus on one sentence or breath, and repeat that again and again. And that can be a meditation too. If you can sit down and meditate, great, but you don't have to. That's not the only way you can relax. And there's also yoga that's specific for trauma survivors, because they also have a hard time with yoga sometimes. So there are meditation exercises that are specific to people who are in the fight, flight, freeze mode. And so I just want the listeners to know that don't feel bad if meditation or yoga doesn't speak to you. Now you know why, that it's the fight, flight, freeze. And so, but you have to find a way to relax, because then your body says, oh, I'm safe now. And the more you do it, and then also one thing too that's really important, looking around in your environment and looking around and seeing, am I safe right now? Like literally tell yourself. That's really important too. Knowing that, telling your body through sensations and through meditation or relaxation exercises that you are safe, because then your body doesn't have to produce all the stress hormones anymore. It stops. So the cortisol or the adrenaline, it will then have relaxing hormones, so to say. It will not constrict anymore. That's one thing too we do when our body constricts when we're in survival mode. And so that's a time that finally our body can say, okay, I don't need to constrict anymore. And so that shoulder pain or that headache or the stomach or wherever you hold the tension can finally relax. And, when we go to the gym, first time we get sore, or like even when we have if we exercise for an hour, often we get sore. And if we constrict all the time, can you imagine if it was ever relaxing, what that does to the muscle? So it's so important to relax those muscles. And when you relax that muscle, it tells your brain you're safe. And so the more we tell our body that we are safe, the mind then gets the message as well that we are safe. And that's what we want, because that the body gives us thoughts too. So we then have different thoughts than when we are in survival mode.
Yeah, it really allows a person to kind of get to this place where they're finding that, just that even if it's a moment where they can relax and they can build upon that.
Yes. Yeah, and when we are in survival mode, for example, we become very anxious. And when we are relaxed and we tell our body, oh, we are fine, a lot of times then the anxiety subsides too. So it actually lessens the emotional roller coaster that a lot of people who've had trauma experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so Dr. Babbel, where can people connect with you and learn more about your book, Heal the Body, Heal the Mind, and all the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is www.drbabbel.com, and there's no dot between Dr. Babbel. And you can find my books there. You can also find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but also through the publisher New Harbinger. And in fact, I just saw that New Harbinger now released an audio book of my book, and I haven't seen that on Amazon yet. So if you are someone who likes audiobooks better than reading, or because I've had one person actually just told me, she said, I can't read that well anymore. Now I'm getting older. So maybe if that's easier for you to do an audiobook, but don't do that. Don't listen to it in the car because it's not meant for listening in the car and learning about it. But then you can go on New Harbinger. There they list it, and hopefully on Amazon. The audio book will be on Amazon as well, but you can get the you can get the book on Amazon as well, just not on audio. And on my website, and then also I'm creating online courses right now, and that will be up in the next couple of weeks probably, that go hand in hand with the book. So if people want to learn more steps, go step by step, I will have online course with audios where I guide people through a meditation and through some exercises to enhance the book and enhance the exercises.
Oh, that sounds fabulous. Well, it's great because people can, pick up the book, they can get involved and be part of your community. Dr. Babbel, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, thank you. That flew by. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Susanne. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, Heal the Body, Heal the Mind, a somatic approach to moving beyond trauma. Again, if you'd like to pick up her book, you can at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.